My name is Tim Bullard. My wife and I bought this place in 2000 and built a house in 2001 and moved here near Ralston, Texas, which is Cook County, right next to Oklahoma. And we really enjoy the quietness and all the wildlife that we've got here. I went to work for Bomber proper in 1985. I'd gotten to know Clarence Turbeville, the manager, and Ike Walker, the other manager there, in the early 70s. I was working at a bank out of college and ended up being their loan officer and was very involved in what was going on. And Mr. Turbeville took a liking to me, and we fished a lot together. He was like a second dad almost. And I like to bass fish, but it doesn't have to be a bass. I just like to catch a fish. I enjoy fly fishing. I enjoy sand bass fishing. I enjoy striper fishing, any kind of fishing, saltwater fishing. I just enjoy, and I like to use artificials. And I'm not a very patient person except when I'm fishing, but I can fish all day and not get a bite waiting on that one bite. But it's just something about that bite. And I guess I like to fish more than I like to hunt, because once you pull the trigger, you can't put it back. And a fish, at least you can catch it. And I like to hunt too, don't get me wrong, but you can catch a nice fish, and if you're not going to eat it, well, you can put it back and catch it again. But you know, I just enjoy them jerking on the line, you know. And I like to fish with light tackle. I like to let the fish play and enjoy them while they're on there. Bomber started in Turbeville's dad's music shop. They're pretty close to downtown Gainesville, and they kind of started working out of the back of that around 1944. More or less, they liked to fish, and they were just creating baits that they could fish with, and then they started catching fish and sharing them with other people. And in 1946, they basically incorporated and really started Bomber proper as a business. The three primary owners were Clarence Turbeville, Ike Walker, and John Parker. John Parker went on to become the dean of the local junior college and was not involved in Bomber so much as Mr. Turbeville and Mr. Walker were. Mr. Turbeville was the salesman, the marketing guy, the promoter. He and Mr. Walker worked together on ideas, and then Mr. Walker was the man that did a lot of the mechanical work, how the baits were built. Most of the baits that had been built prior to that were more shallow running baits, and the original Bomber was more of a deep running bait. Runs deep where the big ones sleep. That was one of the slogans on some of the older boxes. And they were always a very well thought of company in Gainesville, and were very supportive of the community, both Ike and Turby and Mr. Parker, and they treated people good, and people enjoyed working there. And Turby went out of his way to make people feel like they were a very much important part of the company. One of the oldest employees they had there was a fellow by the name of George Gilbreth, and he and his wife Jean both worked for Bomber. George was a person that was in charge of fixing something if it was broke, and he was also the man that was in charge, for the most part, of running the lathe. And I think he told me that he went to work there in 1948. He told me he was 87 years old, still getting around pretty good. He and his wife Jean were just both really good people, and meant a lot to Bomber. When they really originally started what became known as the original Bomber, and it got its name because it looked almost like a bomb, and this was actually when they started back at toward the end of World War II, so it all kind of tied together. When they first started making them, things were short supply, and they were scrounging around for wood and for things to make lips out of, and hooks were a big problem too back then. And they used anything from wooden broomstick handles to electric power line poles or telephone poles that had been taken down and discarded. And they cut the lips out of Prince Albert tobacco cans and made the hook pulls or the bait pulls from twisted paper clips or wire, and then would wrap a little piece of metal around them. The first ones were painted all black, and as they progressed and the lures became more popular, well, they moved to their current location where they were, and on South Lindsay Street there in Gainesville, and they started trying to figure out ways to mass produce these. And they found that using northern white cedar was a very good wood, and they would order the wood by the train car loads. There was a spur right at the back of the plant where they moved to, and they'd unload it. It came in 1x10 rough cut planks, and they would cut those up in 1x1 squares and run them through a doweling machine, make them into a dowel shape, and then they would run them through a lathe that they designed that would start cutting the shapes of the bomber. Then they would be sanded in a type of a tumbler, much like a rock tumbler that you see for polishing stones. After that, then they would be pressure treated in something like a Thompson's water seal. That wasn't, I don't think what it was, but it was something like that. And then from that point, they would go and be drilled for the eyes and hooks, and then they would go to the paint room and be painted, dipped, whatever process they did for that. The first ones were just all painted by hand, any kind of design. They might use a screen like a bridal veil to paint through to make it look like a scale. A lot of it was free-handed by the painters, and the painters that they had over the years were really artists in a way. Later on, they started using stencils. They would take a piece of copper, thin copper plate, and press it to the shape of the particular lure they were going to paint, and then they would go in by hand and cut whether it be a coach dog pattern or a gill or whatever, that they would use that to paint through to put the gill on the bomber. They sent a lot of the stuff. They used home workers a lot. They would, mostly ladies, they would come by and pick up the baits that had been painted, and then they would take several dozen baits home, do all the assembly, fold all the boxes, and then bring them back as a product ready to sell. In 1949, for efficiency and the use of plastic was becoming more and more popular in a lot of things, they made an attempt to make the bomber, the original bomber, into an all-plastic bait, and people refer to it as the 49 series bomber. And it was, for the most part, all plastic. Even the bill part was molded out of plastic, and you had a top and a bottom, and they were glued together. There was a metal pull point that was riveted into the bait, and then a Luxor pull put into that. They didn't run good, and it looked like every one of them would leak. And so they had to recall everything that they had sold. And they sold really well because they were state-of-the-art stuff back then. And it almost bankrupted the company. They just almost didn't survive that. That caused them to go back to wood real quick. In 1968, Turby and Ike sold the bomber plant, or the bomber business, to the Van Ellis family. And Mr. Turby stayed on as general manager. Ike still worked on a part-time basis. In 1971, when they decided to make another attempt at making a bomber out of plastic, they also, because of the changes in the way molds were being made and plastic was being injected, they also came up with a lot of different shapes other than just something that was made from a dowel. And that's when they made baits like the 6A series or the Model A series, which they made in shallow running and deep running in several different sizes, and was probably the most popular bait that Bomber ever had. It really put them on the map for that time. Van Ellis's oldest son, G.C. Ellis, after he got out of college, he came to work at Bomber under Mr. Turbeville, because he was getting to the age where he was talking about needing to retire, and G.C. came and was working, learning under him. In 1984, Clarence did pass away, and at that time, well, G.C. He wasn't the general manager up to then, but that kind of sped all that up, and then he became the general manager in 1984. And GC was the one that hired me in 1985 when I directly went to work for him. Turby meant a lot to me, and GC meant a lot to me, and I just, you know, there's always a soft spot in my heart for Bomber, and always will be.